if we could sign in and out. So we saw some hints that Firebase does that thing, but Seth, David, we saw that it has some hooks for authentication, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Let's just worry about how we want the sign in and out flow to work. So basically, we're going to need a sign in button. We're going to need a sign out button. And if we're not signed in currently, none of this should show up. And I shouldn't see anything except an option to sign in. So if we're not signed in, don't show any of this. Just show a sign in button. If we are signed in, show all of this and a sign out button, but do not show that sign in button. So let's see if we can make that happen without worrying about how sign in and out is really going to work talking to a third-party service. So I need to be able to tell whether we're signed in or not. So on app, I will add a method above render called signed in, and I want that to return true or false. Oops. Use our property initializer trick. So for right now, I'm just going to have it return false all the time until we figure out a better way. And then we want a sign in button that is going to show up if signed in is false. So let's make a new component called sign in, capital S, capital I.js. I'll go ahead and add a style sheet for it too, sign in.css. We'll make this a stateless functional component. So let's import React from, actually we don't even need to name it, do we? Import React from React. Not in the CSS file, though. In the JS file. Then let's import that currently empty sign-in CSS. And let's make our component. Const sign-in equals arrow function. And before I forget, because otherwise I absolutely will, export default sign-in. And this just needs to return a button with JSX. So return button dot sign in, capitalized the same way we do the component. And I want it to say sign in. I'm going to go ahead and throw in a little bit of CSS. I will paste this in Slack. And let's import it into app. Import sign in from ./signin.js. And then what do we say? We only want to show this when we're not already signed in. Doesn't make sense to have a sign in button showing when you're already signed in. And we said, if we're not signed in, we don't want main to show up at all. We don't want any of that. So we've done this before, right? We've made stuff show conditionally. Did that on Dwarf Underground. Can use the same trick here. So just to make it a little cleaner, I'm going to go ahead and make a separate method called render main. And we can just make it return this. And then what we'll do inside render is put a condition. We'll use a ternary like you did last time. So to put a JavaScript expression in the middle of our JSX, why do I have a semicolon? We need curly braces. So what's our condition? This dot signed in. It's whether we're signed in or not, right? This dot signed in. Question mark. So if we are signed in, what do we want to do? Yeah. Show them the page. So render main, right? This dot render main. Else, what do we want to do? Show them the sign in button, right? So let's just put sign in. Right, so this is just an if else. If, I need my parentheses here. If this dot signed in, then render main. Otherwise, if I'm signed out, render the sign in button. Make sense? So if this works, we have signed in, always returning false. So we should see the sign in button, right? And nothing else. There that is. Yes, Skylar?
How does it work on like websites where it signs in automatically for you?
We'll get to that. Yep. Good question. So I see just the button. If I were to change signed in to always return true, I expect not to see the sign in button, but to see everything else. Yay! So that everything else, though, should include a sign out button, right? So we need a sign out button. Let's make that. New component called signout.js. And in there, we will import React from React const sign out equals arrow function stateless functional component. Before I forget, because I totally will, export default sign out. And what's this going to do? Well, it's going to return another button. Button.signout. And we'll make it say something clever like sign out. I'm not going to worry about styling it for right now. So maybe we should... Now, we could find a permanent home for it later. But right now, maybe we just make sure we import it in app.js. Import sign in, import sign out. And when do we want that to show up? If we are signed in, right? So render main could just return that too. So we could have render main return a div because there has to be a single root element, right? You can render the sign out button and main. And since right now signed in is always true, we should see that. And there it is. Not very pretty, but it's there. We can deal with that later. Doesn't do anything if we click it. If I switch this back to a hard-coded false, it goes back to just the sign in button. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this much. Add sign in sign out components. Even though we don't really have a sign in and out flow going yet.